Hello and welcome to the Ellen Made Book Club and this announcement of the 2025 Diversity Book Bingo. So let's see what my bingo board could look like with the books that I have read in 2024. First of all, I have not been very strict with the interpretation of the different prompts. These are not going to be all own voices. I have included books that have some kind of representation of these different things. So there might have been disability representation in the book, but it's not written by a person with disability. I have given the diversity representation and continents a little emoji just to make it easy to mark down which books fit which prompt. The emojis for the different continents are different endangered species in each of the continents. For country I've never read from before, I put Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I had never read a book set in Korea before that I could think of. Pachinko is largely set in Japan, but it is about people from Korea, and it also starts out in Korea. So I thought that would count, and it's also written by Min Jin Lee, who has Korean heritage. I have put the orangutan for Asia and the graph for minority, since they were Koreans in Japan and that was a minority group, and we read about their experience as Koreans in Japan. For laughter, I put The Mother of All Problems by Nancy Peach. This is set in Europe, so I've put a little fish, and I've also put a service dog because this has disability representation in terms of a character with Alzheimer's disease. A book I read for another reading event was Us Against You by Fredrik Backman. This was for my own book club, so that's a reading event. And I've put a fish for Europe, a brain for neurodivergence representation, and a rainbow for LGBTQIA+ representation. For memoir or biography, I put Sociopath. This is set in North America in the United States, and so I put a little B, but it does not have any other of the diversity representation, so no other emoji for that one. For feminist, I put The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. That's set in India. This deals with the caste system and how people are treated based on what group they belong to. A disadvantaged group, maybe that's a better term for it, a marginalized group. For nonfiction, I put The Wager by David Grann. This doesn't really fit any of the diversity requirements, so I haven't put any emojis. I haven't put a continent emoji either because it's, at sea and they travel around and they're Europeans who are traveling, but it's also set in South America, so it's not, an own voices and about living on that continent, and, so that just doesn't have an emoji, and that's completely fine too. For recommended, I have Mink River by Brian Doyle. This was recommended by Melinda at A Web of Stories, and this is set in North America, so I put a little B, and it also has indigenous or native people representation, so I put a little gold medal for that. My second-hand find was 1984 by George Orwell. This is mostly set in Europe, and so I put a little fish. For island, I put Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is set in Japan, which is an island nation, and it's in Asia, so I put an orangutan. For future empowerment, I put Rewitched by Lucy Wood. This deals with self-love and believing in your own potential, and so I found that to be empowering. It has a little bit of LGBTQIA+ representation, but it's very minor, so I decided not to put an emoji there for that. You could if you wanted to. A book from the library was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mokhtar and Max Gladstone. This is a sapphic romance, so I put a little rainbow. It's not set in a specific continent, so I didn't put an emoji for that. For animals, I put Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is set in North America, so I put a little B. This made me think about the consciousness of animals and what it's like to be an encaged animal and, their level of intelligence and emotion and all of that. A good pick for the animals prompt, but no other diversity representation. For a 2024 release, I put Bird Eye by Judith Hennigan. This is set in North America, so I put a little B, and it also has disability representation, so I put the little service dog emoji. A 5-star read for me this year was Beartown by Fredrik Backman. It's set in Europe, so I put a fish, and it also has LGBTQIA+ representation, so I put a rainbow. A book that fit with a prompt from someone's list was Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr. And this was a prompt from my own TBR jar. I pulled the prompt rural and I picked this book. This is set in South America, so I put a little parrot. It also deals with a minority there and disability, so I put a little service dog. For comfort read, I put The Gilded Cage by Lynette Noni. This was the second part in a series, so that was a comfort read for me. And it has LGBTQIA+ representation, so I put a rainbow. For a book plus adaptation, I put Stolen by Ann-Helén Lestadius. I haven't actually watched the TV show yet, but I know there is one. I read the book, so let's just pretend I watched the show for the sake of this example. If I had done that, I could have put The Fish for Europe, a gold medal for Indigenous people, and minority. For mental health, I put The Unfortunates by J.K. Chukwu. The main character in this book is a Black student in the United States. She deals with depression, so that's the mental health prompt, and she also has ADHD. The B for North America, the graph for minority, the rainbow for her queerness, and a brain for the neurodivergence being ADHD. For backlist, I put The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is set in the United States, so I put a little B, and it has a minority representation, so I put the little graph emoji. For short story, I put Galatea by Madeline Miller. No other emojis there. For migration, I put Only This Beautiful Moment by Abdi Nassimian. It's set in Iran and Los Angeles. This has LGBTQIA+ representation, and it also deals with a minority in terms of Iranian people in the US. A genre out of my comfort zone was Marina by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. That is a young adult horror novel, which is definitely not my comfort genre. That's set in Europe, so I put a little fish, but no other diversity representation. A book by a favorite author of mine was Circe by Madeline Miller. This is set in Europe, so I put a fish, but no other diversity representation. A prize winner I read this year was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is set in Europe again, so a fish, and it also has LGBTQIA+ representation, so I put a rainbow. A translated work of fiction I read this year was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. No emojis for that one. So since I have read more than 25 books this year, I was able to get a blackout on the bingo board. But to get bingo, I have to fulfill all of the requirements for the continents and the diversity representation. So let's just count the number of emojis for each item on those lists, and let's see if I got bingo or not. For Indigenous or Native people representation, I have 2 books. For minority, I have 6 books. For LGBTQIA+ representation, I have 7. For disability, I have 3 books. And for neurodivergence, I have 2. So I have at least 1 check mark for all of my diversity representation types. So let's see how I did on the continents. For North America, I have 6 check marks. For South America, I have 1. For Europe, I have 9. For Africa, I have 0. For Asia, I have 4. And for Australia or Oceania, I have 0. So even though I have a blackout on my bingo board and I have fulfilled the diversity representation prompts many times over, depending on how you interpret them. But my bingo still doesn't count because I have not read a book from each of the 6 continents. I don't have one for Africa or one for Australia. So this is something that I need to be mindful of in the coming year, and making sure that I have books from around the world and from all of the 6 continents. And yeah, maybe also be a little bit more strict with my diversity representation interpretation. overall, I think I did pretty good for not, being aware of this bingo at all. But like I said, I haven't been reading as diversely as I would have liked to. So this was a very good exercise for me to sort of check myself a little bit. And I hope it was clarifying for you to see the bingo board in action and seeing some examples of how you could interpret the different prompts. If you have any questions at all, please put them in the comments and I will make sure to answer them and include any extra information in the Google document. There will also be a printable version of the bingo board if you want to, write things by hand. And there will be some graphics that you can use if you want to include them in your own videos and things like that. Just make sure to tag me if you do so that I can see what you are reading and how you're using the bingo board. I would love to see that. Thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in the next one.